know me, I'm also one of the co-organizers of the Tech Leadership Meetup, and I've been in the tech space based in Cape Town for about 13 years now. I used to work at Alan Gray, Prodigy Finance, and the startup called Names and Faces. And currently I work at a company called Hotjar, which I'll talk about a little bit as I get into my talk. What we do at Hotjar, we're a product analytics insights company. Easiest way to describe it is if you buy our product and you install our little script on your website, we'll be able to show you what people are doing on your website. So session recordings and heat maps, so that you can make better decisions about how to improve your website. We also have another side of the product which is around interacting with your actual users. So we've got a survey tool, so think of like Typeform or SurveyMonkey. We've got that embedded in Hotjar, and then we also have a feedback tool where you can embed a widget on your site and get feedback on if there's an issue on your page or it's just a simple rating on your site. But our core product that's used by most people is the recordings and the heat maps, because you can literally see where if someone hits your site, you can see how they moved the mouse and where they got stuck and what they did to complete their session. It's a fully remote company, mostly based in EMEA, so GMT -3, GMT +3 time zone, and we've got over 300 people currently working at Hotjar. So if you are looking to improve your site or your product, or your marketing teams are looking for a product that they can use, have a look at Hotjar and see what we have. We are also hiring, so if you're interested in an opportunity, have a look at our careers page. So that's Hotjar. I currently work in the team I'm responsible for builds integrations. So often people who use Hotjar often want to take that data and merge it with other third-party systems. So for example, Slack. So if you want, as you're receiving recordings or receiving survey responses, you can push them to a Slack channel so that everyone else in your company can see them. So we've got integrations with communication tools. We also have integrations with tools that bring data into Hotjar, so like Google Analytics and Mixpanel, so that you can tag your recordings with the events that are happening, like in Mixpanel, and actually assess what happened. Maybe you want a certain cohort only, and you can then filter those recordings in Hotjar. So the team I work in and currently working with is responsible for building these integrations and helping Hotjar expand its ecosystem. I always like to talk about random side projects I'm doing, not only as a way to market and sell them, but often you find people who are interested in similar things with you, who might be interested in chatting or even working together on certain things. So the first one here is Tech Leadership, which, as Rob has already mentioned, we're working together on this. We're always looking for feedback or people who are interested in maybe joining the organizing committee if that's something you're passionate about. But as you know, Tech Leadership is really about improving the leaders in the technology space within Cape Town, and actually because of the remote events within South Africa, with the hope that if we improve the leaders at companies, we can also uplift the company, the technology and the culture at different companies across the country. No Days Off is a lifestyle brand which I started many years ago. I'm wearing one of the t-shirts. Also, I've been wearing an opposite one, which I often wear. But the whole idea of the brand is to help inspire people to achieve their goals and dreams. And part of it is merch and selling, so that you show that you are living that lifestyle and everything, but part of it is also educating people about habits and everything around achieving your goals and aiming to improve your habits. So one of the things that we recently started is a newsletter that goes out every Monday. It's an inspirational newsletter with visuals that just help you to learn about different aspects of your life. And you can find this on nodaysoff.co.za. Tech Leadership is also techleadership.co.za. And the last two are a bit like even wider. Fahari African Restaurant is a family restaurant that I'm a co-owner of, but along with my parents and my sister. And it's actually in Salt River here in Cape Town. So it's also like a little side project. I mostly do the back office stuff, so anything tech related or anything that's just supporting running that, and then my parents run it on the operation on the ground. Why it's interesting to mention it here, we do cooking classes at the restaurant as an Airbnb experience, and if your company is looking for something interesting to do as a team build, that could be something you want your team to go and do on an afternoon. It's 2.5 hours. So you can go to pari.co.za, you see a cooking class tab, and you can see more details around that. And then the last one is I'm also very much a runner, or interested in running. So I combined running is a passion of mine, and I combined that with tech, which is also a passion of mine, towards the end of last year. I wanted to learn Webflow, which some people probably know about, a modern no-code tool that people are using to build websites, and it's really been growing. I wanted to learn a bit more about that, but I've also always had an idea in my head that often when I'm looking for a race to do or future races to do, I have to go to like a lot of different websites to try to figure out, because races are all over, like on different sites. So I wanted to build something that aggregates all the races that happen in South Africa and is all on one site. So as a runner, I just have that on my phone and I can see all the races that are coming up. So I managed to get that sort of working. The aggregation is manual. So at the moment, actually, because the races keep moving forward as the days go up, there aren't that many races if you actually go and see, but it is live, and I'm trying to figure out that next bit, which is on how can we make it a bit easier to have all the races uploaded on that. So that's whereismyrun.com. It's the only one that's on a .com domain, because that might not be a problem only for South Africa. So check it out, and if you're interested in chatting about that or have ideas to make it better, happy to chat. All right, let me move away from selling myself and get into the actual meat of tonight, which is around assessing the performance of your engineering team. Yeah, so this topic, I think, is often like a controversial topic to discuss for many reasons. Some people don't believe it's possible to measure performance of a software engineering team. Some people think it's too complicated, so it's not worth doing. Some people are just not doing it at all, so are just operating in the dark, or they're measuring it incorrectly, which is like, okay, our team is building stuff, so we're doing well. So there's many aspects of this. My sense and my belief is that if you are working in a software team at any company right now, you're probably doing some form of measurements. A lot of the stuff I'll talk about, your company may already be doing. So my goal for tonight is hopefully you leave with something new, just one thing out of everything I'm talking about that you aren't already doing, or you can enhance at your current company. Or you leave with a lot more if your company is actually more on the end of like, we aren't measuring anything at all. Is it possible to measure? Yes, it definitely is. If it wasn't, then we wouldn't be able to differentiate between the great engineering teams that we have in the world and those that aren't. So there definitely is a way to measure, and it is possible. Why should you measure? There are many reasons, and oftentimes it's actually, you end up measuring because you get asked to. Maybe your CEO is not a tech-based CEO, but they ask you, maybe how's our software engineering team performing, or we're about to get acquired, and the company that wants to acquire us wants to know the value of our engineering team, or things like that. And then people end up trying to scramble to figure out, like, what can I measure and what do I need? But the reality is, the answer to that question should lie more in the statement that's at the bottom, which is, if you aren't measuring anything, you actually can't improve. And I have a firm belief that even if you're doing well, there is always room for improvement. How do you know where you should improve and what you should work on if you're not measuring anything at all? So that's why you should measure it. And of course, as a side effect of that, if you're measuring things, when you then get asked for certain data or things like that, you have it offhand. And then what and how should you measure in terms of engineering performance is basically going to be the core of the rest of the talk, because I think that's where like the important aspect is. So I'll move into that in the next slide, and then the rest of the slides will really focus on that part, but I thought it was worth addressing why we think it should be important to measure. All right, so what and how? Those four areas which I'll talk about now. If you look at a company that says they have a high performing software engineering team or teams, they're definitely great at all those four things. So the value of the product they're creating, their technical quality, process efficiency, and then their team health and culture. If you remove any one of those, it's very much unlikely that a team can be considered high performing. But the top one is actually the most important, because you can have great technical quality, great process, everyone's happy at the company. But if you're building something that no one wants, then it's pointless. So that's why I put that one at the top. The other ones, the order is debatable and everything. But the top one is very much driven by the other three too. Because for you to be able to build something valuable and people feel fulfilled at the company and things like that, that all comes with everything else working really well. And for you to be able to move as fast as your competitors and everything, it all comes with the other aspects working well. But I think it's important to note that at the root of everything, and in most team discussions, you should often be talking about why, you should be asking the question, even as engineers, why are we building this thing? What value is it going to bring to customers? And after you've built things, you should also be checking and assessing how are those things doing. And that's actually what we're going to start talking about. I'm going to make it so difficult for the cameraman to edit when I'm rotating like this. Product value. So the next set of slides, which talk about each of those four components, have a set of tools and approaches that align to it. It's not an exhaustive set. There's so many different tools in the world. It's not an exhaustive set of approaches. But when I'm talking about them, it should give you an idea of what sort of things fall in that bucket. There are probably other tools that you're using that may be interesting to hear about and other approaches, but it should all focus on that product value bit. So we'll again focus on product value, which, as I say, is really about, is the thing we're building, is the product we're building making customers' lives easier or enabling them to do something that makes their lives better. So let's use an example of our sponsors, OfferZen, their product. They've got one big set of customers is the companies that are using the platform to recruit engineers. So their product value there is, if you don't use OfferZen, you're going to have to firstly find good quality candidates yourself, and be able to, and you're probably going to be looking for them from different platforms and everything, and be able to also market your company in a sort of wider way in the ecosystem. And then you've got a platform like OfferZen where you sign up, of course you're paying because you are buying the value of the product, and all of a sudden you're exposed to engineers or people working in tech that are looking for opportunities at the same time, and are matched with people that actually align with perhaps what you're trying to recruit for. So that's where the value they are bringing in is. And that's as a product as a whole, but also if you narrow down within each product team has features that they build, and each feature that you build also can be looked at as how does that feature provide its own value in its own isolation. So maybe OfferZen introduces a better way to filter for candidates, because maybe there is actually a lot and you want to filter and narrow down to just a specific, maybe senior engineers that you're hiring that match this certain tech stack. And then they improve the way of filtering from the previous way they had, and then their way of measuring values now that you can filter and search for people in a faster way on that Monday morning when all candidates, I don't know if they're still popping on Monday, but all candidates, new existing candidates come in. So that's just an example of like a feature or a product and the value that it brings in. So what's important is, or what people normally make the mistake of is they measure output. So, okay, our team has been given these specs to build by our product manager or by our CEO. It's like a small startup. We've built it. Okay, let's go to the next one. Like we're measuring like what we're building, but we're never tracking like, is this thing actually working? Is it solving the actual problems that customers want? Are we making customers' lives easier and everything? So, in terms of measuring product value, things that you want to be doing. Can you track what's actually happening on the site? So events like, if you're using tools like Mixpanel, can you track if people are actually clicking certain buttons that you're expecting them to click, and create funnels that allow you to see where people are dropping off in that line? Can you use something like Hotjar which is showing you what's actually happening, like the recordings and the heat maps of where people are spending time on the site, so that you can see if people are actually doing what you're expecting, or you can improve where there are problems that are shown. And then you also want to see if you can get feedback from your actual users. So NPS is traditionally used. You must have seen it on a site at some point where you get asked how likely are you to recommend this product. You get a score from 0 to 10, and you normally click whatever aligns with what you think about that product. And that can give you a bit of a range. If you get a lot of data back in, you can gauge whether people are liking what you're offering or not. And for example, you can have that even for multiple features. So for example, with the integrations, squad that I work in, we actually have NPS for each integration that we build. So I would like to recommend the Slack integration and things like that. And then obviously you can have that's more like actual quantitative data. But you can, if your company is fortunate enough to have a wide range of customers, you can actually have a sample set of your customers that you have customer interviews with, where you ask them in-person questions of like, where are they struggling? Are they finding value? What else can be added to the product? Then there's other sort of indicators that also give you an idea of like, are we improving or are we not? For some, depending in your context, if it works, active users. So something like an Instagram would care about active users. Are there a lot? Is that increasing? Is that like dropping? Reviews. If it's an app, for example, and you can go check your reviews. How's the app doing? How's it rated? And of course, one of the more important ones is revenue. If your company is a for-profit and the product is maybe a subscription-based product, how's our revenue looking? Is it growing or is it actually not moving at all? Those are all sort of separate different indicators that are trying to answer the question of what value is this product providing. So back to that, I think the most important part is realizing that this is why companies exist, and to enable and make customers' lives easier. There's ways to measure these things. There's tools, like I said, Mixpanel, for example, or Watcha, and there's plenty of tools out there. What you just need to figure out is, why are we trying to build something? How are we going to track from when someone starts using it all the way till they finish, whether they have had a good experience? And then also you've got some other, sometimes lagging indicators of, is this thing actually working or not? And some companies will track everything, yeah? In some cases, you choose what makes sense for you, but you should be able to answer the question. One way you can look at this is, if I ask you, if you went to your team now, whether it's like 6 or 10 people, and asked them to answer the question of how much value the product's providing, will people give a similar answer, or people are completely going to give you something different? That shows you like how much people know about measuring value within your company. All right, let's move to technical quality. So, done with value. Technical quality is really around the solutions that the engineering team is building, and how well structured are those? Do they allow for scale? Are you confident that the solutions that are built by your team can be released to the public without causing too many bugs and incidents and things like that? So how do you actually know? Software is very subjective too. How do you actually know that like the code that's getting written by the engineering team is of a good state? The tech stack that you're using is in a good place. Those are the things you're trying to look at. Those things influence helping you to move quicker, and also it has a factor to play in a later one, which is around team health and culture, because most engineers actually enjoy working in places where the quality of the technical solutions are great, because then the developer experience is much better than having to deal with a lot of sort of surrounding issues. So how do you measure some of these things? Tracking, so bug tracking tools will show you whenever there's like an issue in your system, so like things like bugs like in Sentry are examples, they'll show you like if there's exceptions that are happening, they'll be logged, your team will be notified, but you can usually, those tools will have like graphing systems that you can look at trends. Is the number of bugs that my team's releasing starting to increase? That means we've got some technical quality problems or something is going on, and then you can chat about it as a team. What's going on? Is it what's changed or what's happening that we can make sure that quality is improved? Tools like Datadog allow you to monitor more on an application level. So even things like the requests that are happening in your app's APIs, or even just like functions. The traces around like what are the actual calls before for like an actual function to be processed. How long is it taking to process those calls? How much memory is getting used? How much CPU is getting used? And again, you want to look at those and see, are there trends that go against what we're expecting? So our API is suddenly getting slower and slower over time. What's changing? What's going on there? And then static analysis tools. Code Climate is a quality product. There's many others that are recommended, but they also can tell you, they'll inspect your code. Usually, you can even put it out on pull request or merge request level, and it will show an engineer that this code that you're about to check in is going to change the quality of the code from an A to a B because you're introducing duplication or some cyclomatic complexity, things like that. Those again help you, but also again you can also look at that from a trend perspective and say, okay, for the last 3 months, which side of the code moved, and what's going on, what's causing that. Change fail rate is one of the DORA metrics, which I actually mostly spoken about more in the process side, but this one falls in the technical quality in my opinion. So the DORA metrics were DevOps, were done by Google. DevOps and operations and research team, they went and basically investigated a large number of companies to try to figure out what makes high-performing teams like different to, I guess, teams that are not performing as great. And they came up with 4 different metrics that you can look at, and those metrics always aligned to, depending on how that data for those metrics looked at, you could say this team is elite, or this team is like medium, or this team is like very low in the performance scale. Change fail rate is one of the metrics. The other 3 are on the next slide. But change fail rate is basically how often do you have an issue when you release changes to a production environment. So teams can measure that, and as you imagine, elite teams are the ones that have like very minimal cases. It's not to say you should have 0. The argument is if you have 0 issues whenever you go to production, like for a long time, your team is actually not taking enough risks. But it needs to be like in a low percentage. I think for that one, I'll be lying if I say, but I think it might have been, to get the accurate one, but I think it might have been anything under 15% of your changes. But basically, it's such an important metric because then it also gives you a bit of an idea of like the technical quality of your solution and what your team is building. And then test coverage, obviously not foolproof because you can have 100% test coverage, but then there could still be issues in your system. But it is also a great indicator of like how are things changing in terms of the team's automated testing. If you also see that that's just like a massive drop over a few months, it's probably not enough automated testing getting done and could lead to poor query code because people are not, are more worried about refactoring code because it's risky or are just doing it without any insight. And SLOs are something we actually use at Hotjar, plugged into a Datadog. All those monitors from Datadog, it's just a way in which, as a team lead and a product manager, you agree with the engineers on everything you build. What are the acceptable sort of standards that you're accepting, and then you put in those thresholds in Datadog, and then you get notifications as soon as something is broken. So an example is if you have an API call and you say 90% of the time this API call should respond in 100 milliseconds, and then if there's a window in which that suddenly gets broken, then your SLOs go red, and then everyone goes and checks what's going on. and then you can also do a post-mortem to just see what was the cause. But again, all these are ways in which you're monitoring and measuring the technical quality of your engineering team. And then process. So process is really about ways of working. Like, how's our team ways of working? Like, what all the things you do around making sure you get you get like features built and get stuff to production. This is where the other three Dora metrics really come to play. Cycle time, also known as lead time in a traditional manufacturing, is how long does it take from when a piece of work gets started to it finishes. I think that's more like the traditional lead time definition. The average of that, of all your pieces of work from when they start till they finish, is what's cycle time. Teams measure it differently. Some teams will measure from when the feature starts getting discussed. So when product managers actually start discussing a feature till it gets to production. What I found most teams do, and what we also do at Hotjar, is we measure from when a ticket is already to do, so from when a ticket moves from to do, and it's actually in progress. So the product sort of and design bits have been confirmed and everything. It's now the building. So we're measuring really from the building part till it lands in production. This basically shows you how efficient your team is in like working on things until they get live and the customers can use them. If you find that that's suddenly increasing, it means your customers are getting features at a slower rate. And again, you want to measure that on a certain cadence, maybe or you're looking at it maybe once every 2 weeks, or according to how often you have your retros. So before you have a retro, you want to see what's our cycle time since the last retro. Then the team can discuss. All of a sudden, if it was 48 hours, and then now it's like 1 week to get the average time, it means something drastic's happened. What's caused that? And sometimes it's okay. It could be like there's a lot of like incidents that have happened that have caused that, but it can also be an early indicator of like what you need to fix. Mean time to restore is somewhat, you would think of it a little bit of a cycle time, but it's more related to when there is an incident. So when there's an issue in production, like a bug or an issue that's broken for customers, how quickly do you restore your system back to normal functional bits? And again, you get an average of that, and then you can see whether that's like increasing. It means that your customers are in a bit more issues. It means it takes you a long time to discover issues, but also once you discover them, you maybe struggle to fix them if you're finding it's getting a bit long. And restoring, I think it's important to mention, restoring a system doesn't mean fixing the bug. Sometimes it just means reverting and going back to a stable state, and you can work on the bug outside of that, and that goes back into cycle time of like fixing the bug. And then deployment frequency should be clear. How often do we deploy in a certain cycle? I've put linear B there. It's one of the tools that's really grown that actually gives you all these metrics, and it can plug into your systems, Jira and GitHub, GitLab, and you actually just get those metrics on an individual level and a whole team level and organization level if you have multiple teams. So you can actually see all these stats about this if you've configured it. But you don't have to pay for a tool. Depending on your setup, every setup is different. You can probably gather these tools. In fact, Jira actually gives you cycle time. You can go to reports and you can view, I've forgotten the actual name of the tab on the side, but then it gives you like a cycle time. Deployment frequency, depending on what your setup is, you can probably track how many times things have gone to production. You could track it from even just, if you merge immediately to main or master, and that's how it goes to production, that could actually be your count if you can just hook into your GitHub or your GitLab. Or it really depends on how your infrastructure is set up. But you could set it up by yourself if you want to use a tool like Linear. So that's that on process efficiency. It's just, the recommendation is look at all these different things and assess them and see when they're moving in the wrong direction, what's causing them. What's causing them is usually not anything in the org, and then you can then move just to improve them. And then the last of the four areas that we are talking about measuring is around the team health and culture bit, which very often is neglected. Yeah, so this is really about how happy are people to be working at your company. Are they enjoying the work they do? Are they growing? And yeah, are they fulfilled with the work they're doing at your company? There's a couple of ways to look at this. From a qualitative side, one-on-ones, so if you are a team manager, you should be gathering any signals of like people not being happy or resolving issues as soon as you can, where there's conflicts between people. Team retrospectives, as per usual, will help the whole team to talk about things that are bothering them and then address them. And as usual, the important thing with retrospectives is the action items that come out of that actually get addressed. Because I think a lot of teams have retrospectives, but then the action items don't go anywhere, so people end up feeling the retrospectives are a waste of time and are not really helping them move. But that's more on the qualitative side. On the quantitative side, pulse checks. So by pulse checks, I mean just a rating, like how did you feel this week? And if someone can just put like out of 5, just a little rating. And if someone puts in a pulse check every week, you're able to tell if someone is suddenly like 3s and 2s for the last 4 weeks. And that can be a conversation point of like what's going on. It can give you an early indicator that something's wrong with someone or something's wrong with the whole team if maybe suddenly your whole team has that as a pulse check. And when you also do like reviews and performance reviews and things like that, you can actually look back at like, oh, your pulse check for the last, if you do 6-month cycles or 3-month cycle performance reviews, has been this. What can be done to improve things? If someone's really on the low, or if someone's really like on a 5, then they are very happy to be there. And then surveys, of course, to get more detail, because the pulse check is just like, okay, how do you feel this week? But surveys, most companies do like once a year or something, or twice a year team engagement survey or something like that around what could we improve at this company, what's missing, how are you feeling about still working here, and things like that. That can also feed information into you. 15.5 is a tool that I've used. It covers one-on-ones, pulse checks, and surveys. Again, you can use any other tools that are out there. It's just a great one that I found because it's all automated. If you're a manager, you've got your team, you can use 15.5 and it will send emails to people on you can decide like usually maybe end of your week and the pulse checks will come in. Your one-on-ones, you can record them in there and take in all the notes in there. And you can have surveys. On top of the pulse checks, you can have surveys that are asking people certain questions. In fact, it actually does the pulse check and then it has what's been your highlight of this week and what's something that hasn't really gone well that we can help you with, and then other ones are just custom questions that you can add as a company. So all this helps you to try make sure you stay on top of the team culture, because as I say, you can have all the other things. So you can have the product value, you can have great technology quality and great process quality. But then it's pointless if this is not sorted out, because then people will come to your company and they'll leave like 3 or 4 months later. So you're always like in a cycle of recruiting and people leaving because they're not happy. So this is also important. So yeah, in summary, they are all important. I don't think there's like running away from that. Product value is the most important because that's what keeps the engine going. That's why we exist as a company. So at the top level is what should be getting asked for. And then surrounding them is technical quality, process efficiency, team health, and culture, which all play their role. And when you're looking at measuring an engineering team, there is no one measure. I think that's what the takeaway is. There is no one measure you can say, oh, I'll give you this number and I know my engineering team is a 90, and then the Google one is a 95, so I'm really good. There are so many surrounding factors that come into play, but often a lot of places are not even tracking some of this data or tracking little bits of them or only focusing on one area. Maybe the company just focuses on product value and then you miss out on all the other things that actually give you full insight into our product, our engineering team is performing and should be measured. And a few things that just came to my mind as I was wrapping up the slides last night is if there is something that you don't have or you're not doing that you're thinking of introducing, go back to your company and make small changes and measure the impact bit by bit. Don't try to do 400 different changes all at once. It's like, okay, we're now going to start measuring everything and make small changes and slowly measure impact and then slowly uplift and improve your team. Usually too many changes can cause havoc and also it gets very tricky to figure out what's actually moving the dial. Second one is there's also a lot of things happening. So if you think about it, like all those had multiple different measures. Each of those 4 had multiple different measures. If you are a team lead, imagine, or an engineering manager, imagine waking up and looking at 100 different metrics and you're like, okay, where should I focus on everything? What's important is to focus on critical areas, and by critical areas I mean what's actually causing you the most pain at the moment. You usually know what that is. So sometimes it's like, okay, how come every time we release a feature, we're always getting bugs? So then you know, let's pause and just look at technical quality. Everything else we're tracking, you look at it from the side, but focus on the critical area, and then once you stabilize it, then you can go to the next one that's causing problems, and you can park the other one. You still look at it, but you don't have to zone in on it every time. Else you're overwhelmed. And then understand the different levels to use data. That again is also coming from who's asking for the data and why. A couple of examples that can come to mind are sometimes maybe engineering and product is always the whole engineering and product. They should work well together, but sometimes it's a debate of like, no, let's build more features, but engineering is like, no, but our technology stack needs a bit of a boost, or we need to do some technical work. The data is easy to then bring to product and actually convince them, because then you're talking about the data from a customer's perspective. So it's like, oh, all our API endpoints have suddenly gone slower. They're now taking like more than 1 second to respond from a few months ago where it was 100 milliseconds. Then, so every user is having a degraded performance. Then suddenly the product comes back and says, okay, maybe we need to fix that before we bring in a new feature. Same with like whether it's going to, if the data is needed on a higher level, like where it's like the board or the CEO, there's different ways you can take all this performance data and use it for the right scenario. So you just need to understand where to use it. Software is a team sport. I think that's also important. It's not an individual thing. Most companies will work in teams now. So a lot of these metrics, I hardly spoke about focusing on individuals. Even though I mentioned that linear view will show you per individual, my encouragement would be to use that more in very critical scenarios. Like let's say for some reason an engineer has not done a deployment in 2 weeks, then it's like the data's there, like what's going on, let's have a conversation. But what's more important is the team, not to try to use it to like micromanage individuals. The team stats are the ones you want to move because everyone works together in coordination. And then also, because now you have numbers that you're tracking and you actually have real measures, you can use them to set targets and goals to give teams a direction. So you can actually use those Dora metrics as an example to say, okay, here's where we currently are. We've been measuring for a few months, but now we want to reduce our cycle time to this amount. We want to increase the deployment frequency to this amount. We want to reduce our mean time to restore. And that can be like the engineering goal for the next quarter or for the next half a year. And the team then works around figuring out how to get there. But at least there's a guideline, as opposed to usually someone can walk into a room and say, okay, we need to improve our technical quality. And then everyone's like, okay, what does that actually mean? How do we do it? But now you actually have ways in which you know it's actually working and it's moving. So use them to actually set a direction. And then of course, both qualitative and quantitative measures are important. A few of those things were like the the whole thing about actually customer interviews for the product value one, and on the team health and everything around. Actually, the one-on-ones are also still important. So it's easy as engineering people to be too focused on numbers. We can miss out on actual qualitative side also, which brings in good input. Sometimes the numbers can guide you a little bit in the wrong direction, and you can build a product for robots or something instead of one for actual people. So speak to your customers, speak to the people you work with, take the numbers and actually use them as a conversation with the team and say what's causing this, and then move the numbers in the right direction. All right. Quick one on the way to find me. If you on the socials, LinkedIn, Twitter. I don't really tweet that much except retweet tech leadership, and just follow. I'm a consumer on Twitter. I follow a lot of tech stuff, but I am there. Instagram, probably use that more than Twitter. And I said I'm a runner, so I'm on Strava. So if anyone is into like sport and stuff and wants to have a chat on sports stuff, all of them you can just search for my name, it should be obvious. And just a reminder about like all the different like side projects I mentioned. If anyone is interested in chatting about that and and getting involved in any of them. And I think that is it. Questions. Remembering there's no such thing as a stupid question.
About how to not micromanage the software engineering team. How do you accomplish that when you're dealing with agile, workflows? Because obviously, if somebody is within a team and they need to do something in order to move forward, how do you overcome those barriers? I know you're from Hotjar, big fan of Hotjar, but like, how does Hotjar specifically overcome those barriers of making sure that people don't feel micromanaged in those spaces?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I'll answer it in I guess many different routes. One is usually when someone micromanages, there's two reasons why people micromanage. One is that's how they think leading people is, so which is wrong. Then the other one is the person actually is micromanaging. It's like, if I don't actually ask this person to do the work, they're not going to do it. If I don't follow up with them, it's not moved forward, so I need to follow up with them. The second one is solved by the people you hire. So the culture you have with the company, everyone else around you is like self-driven and behaves in a particular way. You will feel completely not in the right place if you're the one who's sitting there and waiting to be told what to do. So that is more a cultural thing. I think you say how does Hotjar do it? I think it's more how well they recruit like people, as in the type of people they want to recruit. You'll be caught out in the interviews process and like your reference checks and everything before you even get into the company if you're going to be the type of person who's sitting back. The first one
is it too much to ask for those checkpoints of how they recruit? Because I think that's a big thing that like people need to overcome in the tech industry. Like just making sure that you're recruiting the right people. So like how does Hotjar specifically like recruiting people?
Yeah, it would be very detailed, but I'll share one aspect which might feel like overkill, but essentially when you are in the final, now your second last interview round is basically a 2-week window where you get given a task and you become part of the company. You can work on it obviously outside of your normal work hours because you probably have to be at another job, but then you actually get to meet people at the company and you join like some calls and things like that, and you interact with the engineers at that company. So it's basically a 2-week working at the company in reduced hours, but then you can also gauge like, is this a place I want to work, is this a place I'll thrive in, but then they also gauge that. Like not every company is going to do that, not every company is going to have the luxury to do that, I understand, but I think it's one of the big reasons why they've managed to do that. And of course there's an advantage in that there's a lot of people applying there, so they're able to do that, but it's like an interview for 2 weeks. So that's one of the filters. But of course, even prior to that, it's like even the chats with the managers and things like that, the interviews around what work have you done in the past and how do you handle certain situations and scenarios, that helps with it.
So in other words, Hotjar only specifically hires people that have been in environments where they communicate well and are able to deliver.
Yeah,
I think that's great. Thank you.
Cool. Yes.
Maybe also to add on to the same question, in our world, it's a matter of how to avoid micromanagement, right?
Yeah.
Having agreements, right? Up front. So the idea is at the end of X, we agree as a team, and the individual commits to, I'm going to deliver X, Y, Z. And at the end of that period, we have that conversation to say, obviously the first and second cycle might be a bit bad, but eventually, we all know what you're supposed to deliver. If you don't deliver, it's clear, data will say straight up, you're supposed to do this, you're not delivering. So that it gives me the free will to say, even day one or day two, I might not do as much, but I still know I've got a target. I can still cover it up regardless of if I was on these 2 days or I was not. But at the end of the day, I'm going to deliver.
Yeah, exactly. I think people, if give people the benefit of the doubt. Your first assumption should be someone wants to work at your company, someone wants to do good work. If you suddenly see a drop in that, you need to investigate what the cause of that is. Are they feeling isolated? Have they not been given the resources to be able to do their work well and everything? But it's very rare that unless you've really gone wrong with your hiring, that you have someone who's there to sabotage the system. So most of the times when things are not going well for someone, it could even be they're having an issue at home, like a family issue or something like that, and we are quick to often then be like, they didn't deliver. Let me micromanage and like, hey, can you get this done? Can you get this done? So yeah, micromanagement is not the default solution, except as you say, like when it's really like dire, like you're doing like a performance management thing or something where you're really now trying to focus on very particular goals and try to see if you can help the person or move them out. So, yeah.
I have a totally random question. It's more on the tech side of things.
Yeah.
A lot of these metrics are great if you've got greenfield projects and when you're sort of like starting afresh. I guess what are your thoughts around stupidly legacy systems where they live in a box, they break the company dies, but you have to keep them alive and you have to like kill them slowly, type of thing. How does that impact like DORA metrics, for example? You've got something, big ball of mud.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would ask you: Are you actively developing in the system new features, or it's parked? I don't think it's that parked. Yeah.
You keep the company running, so you're killing it slowly.
Yeah.
But you've got zero tests in there, and but it still has to live.
Yeah.
So I think it's less about that. It's a lot of these metrics tend to work well in greenfield projects, at least community, less messy environments. So I'm curious about. Also, I think anyone else in the room can also jump in here.
Yeah.
Strategies towards legacy systems.
You mean basically our government?
So imagine if you've got a system that's running like Adobe Flash, right?
Yeah.
People are still using it, but it has to die.
Yeah, I think it goes to the root of measure what matters for you. So are you trying to move faster in the legacy system, or are you trying to kill it off, as you're saying? Maybe if you're trying to kill it off, what you're actually measuring more is how much of this chunk are we cutting out of this every cycle, because then you're now moving to maybe greenfield new system that's going to have everything. If you're actually building new features on that system, could you measure just for those? Could you put tests in just for those new features? so that you get your ways of working aligned with how you want to be working going forward in the future. It's a tricky one without like the actual scenario, because it's like because legacy systems can be all over. But I think why I asked the question about are you actively developing on it is because if the idea is not really, sometimes legacy systems are okay to just leave as they are. Like, don't touch it, it works, it's been working for years, we're building something new or we are extracting from it. So let's not now go spend an investment of like building tests for it when we know we're going to destroy it. Because there's also a cost, like engineers are spending time trying to mess around in this legacy technology and everything. But I would measure more like, if you're like cutting it out, like how much are we breaking it apart with each cycle? And there'll be a goal you then set for the team to say maybe by halfway through the year, we want to cut out a quarter of that system and moved it to this new service. And then the team actually focuses on that. And cycle time and stuff can be measured in that new system because it's also new and clear, and that's where you want to be moving fast. So it's like the metric itself, does it make sense to measure in this context that you're in? That's the question you'd ask, and then you should be able to get an answer from it.
Cool, makes sense.
But it's like a...
Yeah, it's a genuine question. I
Yeah.
was curious about, it's like I said, the derivatives are great. Greenfield's project, you get them upfront. Like it's a thing.
You can go.
Yeah, thanks. What, before getting to the leadership position, what is that one thing you wish you knew before getting to the position? And number two, what kind of resources would you recommend for someone transitioning into a leadership position?
Yeah, both good questions. I wish I knew more than 100 things before. But I think I was a bit fortunate because the company I was working at prepared future sort of people are going into sort of leadership positions in the future before you became one. So you almost got all the material that everyone wishes they got prior to that, which I think is lacking in a lot of places. A lot of people, the mistakes people get promoted because you're like the best engineer, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have to talk to people and things like that. So.
Sorry, if you don't mind me asking, what company were you working for? Previously.
I transitioned while I was at Project Finance. So about five years ago. So so I'm trying to think what for me did I recall was a big thing. I think one of the first big challenges was managing people who are more senior and more technical experts than I am. And because I always had this view that, you then become the engineering lead, so you come with this, you have almost a self-stress that you put on yourself that you should know the same as that person. So right at the beginning it wasn't like that, but very quickly I then had senior engineers or people who were older than me, who were more experienced, or even like worked in spaces like I wasn't much of an expert in like the DevOps space and stuff. And then you're like, okay, I don't know as much as I can about this, but over time you learn, because now you're in the role and everything, and you learn that it's more about enabling and supporting those people, but in their growth and stuff, they're actually very much self-driven, and you can also learn a lot about that space from that person. So it's like sort of a co-working thing together with like more senior people. But I think there are lots of other challenges people face. A lot of it is communication, actually. Just people like how to communicate and like how to actually be a supportive lead is not something that comes out by default unless someone's like prepared for it. Resources-wise, I can send you, we can chat after and I'll send you, we've got a list on tech leadership of a couple of books, but I've written a few articles on also for first-time leaders on like what podcasts and things and stuff you can listen to. One thing I highly recommend though is if you can get a bit of practice of the sort of things you'd be doing in a leadership role in the future before you become one, that's very beneficial. So I did a lot of things like run an internship at Prodigy Finance. So then you get to do the hiring of the interns. You get to be kind of like the manager of the interns when they come in and support them. So you learn a little bit about that. Onboarding, the company grew quite a lot when we were there. Rob was also at Prodigy, that's how we know each other. It grew a lot while we were there, so we onboarded a lot of engineers as they came in. And it's things that like as a lead you would do over later on, but you're doing it without the title and without the pressure. So no one's sort of pushing you. So that by the time you then do the transition, you're learning like further things. And I would also recommend like as much as you can, if you are an engineer, get to a point where you feel you understand fully like the fundamentals of tech. You've built a couple of systems that you've seen through and you've seen after building them, whether they were really good or they were bad, and you've learned a lot from a wide range of systems, because once you become a lead, you'll be in many scenarios where you don't want to be too unfamiliar with tech because you are leading tech people. So almost live through the engineering time and embrace it as much as you can, then sort of do the switch. But we can chat a bit more about the resources and I can give you after that. Yeah, there was one day first and then
So say you're working mostly with freelancers or you're outsourcing work to software houses. How would you then sort of like work with them and use those processes without imposing on their own way of doing things?
Yeah, that's that is a tough one because I don't know, it depends on the contract you have with the software houses. Because if I think the one thing you can do is introduce the value measuring bit, because let's say, because normally the software house relationship with another company is almost like the company is the product manager and the software house are the engineers. So from the product value side, you could be like, okay, we want to use Mixpanel. Our company wants to use Mixpanel. We want to track what's happening on our website. We want to use Hotjar. We want to track. You guys build it in. But when it comes to their internal ways of working, that is in their space. Like it's very difficult for you to influence how they're going to have to decide and drive that process, because that's their expertise. That's what they're selling to you. They've got the engineers and stuff. If it's freelancers, then it depends on a freelance setup. If it's one person, then some of these metrics kind of don't make sense. Some do. But if it's like a team of freelancers, then it's almost like you've got an engineering team for yourself, and you could work something out that you track it. But again, it's very scenario based. But product value, I think you can always measure if you are the company. Yeah.
What's your take on engineering managers using number of peers as a metric for performance review? Especially if they're not like super technical. Obviously, at the same time, you can do little peers, and certain times when you can do maybe a few number of big peers. But like sometimes they just say, okay, you have to do like let's say 20 in a month, for example.
Yeah, I think simple answer is pointless. Like I can put out 20 pull requests today. I'll put in a couple of comments in the code. I will delete a line. So I can do the work that's needed in 1 month and do nothing else for the rest of the month. So that's like measuring lines of code. It's the same argument. That's not what you should really be looking at. And once again, that again starts looking at individual. We're trying to look at teams. So yeah. All right, I think we'll take 2 more questions. One was here first, and then one day.
You mentioned just now that for one freelance developer, lots of these don't make sense, these metrics. And while you were presenting, I thought, at some kind of a scale, this stuff sort of makes sense, right? So what would that kind of scale be? Like an engineering team of 20 plus, or where would you start to implement, like track the cycle time? Would it be a team of 5? Would you worry about it?
Yeah, a good question. I think as soon as you're like what would be like a four people or so engineering team, that's already a team that you can start looking at things like that. the thing is, usually in those scenarios, it's very startup based, and people are like really moving fast and churning out things. They're sitting in the same room there. So your problems are usually more on the product value side, because you're trying to build something that actually makes sense in the world, and you're less worried about are we moving fast enough. It's very obvious if the cycle time is messed up, if it's 4 people, building a startup or building a very small project. But around there you can already start, because it can give you a bit of team performance. It might just be overkill in the environment. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. So I wouldn't do it with like 1, 2, 3 engineers. When it gets to 4 or 5, that's now like what would normally be a team in an org with multiple teams. So it starts to look at the right size. But again, at small teams, I've worked in a smaller startup before, and while we could track some of these, we didn't really look at all of them, and you could tell when we've had a week of no deployments. It's like you knew everything that was happening in the company, so it didn't have to be as detailed.
Thanks.
How do you balance off the recognition part with the management of like a specific person compared to the whole team? Because you don't want to recognize people who are actually really doing very well. At the same time, you don't want to demotivate other people to feel like they're doing useless work compared to that person.
Right. And by what do you mean by recognition? Just like actually stating you've done well, or how they get paid, or
Yeah, in a team setting, maybe you're doing a meet, but you
Yeah.
want to recognize also people who are doing well as an inspiration more than directly to break away from us.
yeah. So my belief is recognition or positive feedback in public, negative feedback in private. That's how positive feedback in public, because as you say, you actually say that it's like inspiration. Like people, as a leader, the behaviors you encourage and you praise carry on to others. They're like, oh, okay, there's a learning there. What did the person do? I need to also do the same. But then when you do have called it negative feedback, or critical feedback, or something that someone hasn't done really well, they shouldn't feel like you're exposing them to everyone to say, oh, I didn't like the way you communicated in that meeting, or something like that. It's more a learning between you and them. But yeah, I think if your culture is right, there's no reason to be shy of praising people. And actually, most of the time, the praise might not even come from you. It might come from the other engineers in the team to say, thank you so much to this person for what they did with this work, or how they ran this meeting and everything. And you are almost just helping back to back that up. Yeah. Right.